Russian President Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine enters its 19th week. We are past the 4-month mark. The military situation has not changed dramatically in recent days, but as our expert András Racz predicted 2 weeks ago, Severodonetsk has fallen and the Ukrainian defenders, after a tactical retreat, have taken new positions. Also, we have seen the return of indiscriminate missile attacks, including on a shopping mall in Kremenchuk in central Ukraine. The biggest news of the past days of summitry was the EU Council, the European Council, granting Ukraine candidacy status, followed by the G7 summit at Schloss Elmau, which came out strongly in support of Ukraine. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, in his final press conference, stressed the partners' unity and determination, the Entschlossenheit and Geschlossenheit, in their support for Ukraine in terms of military assistance, financially, economically, but also by providing humanitarian assistance. Scholz announced budgetary help to the tune of almost $30 billion, which would see Ukraine's budget through to the end of the year. The Chancellor also made clear that the support would continue, quote, as long as it is necessary, creating a sort of whatever it takes moment. Meanwhile, the gas supply situation in Germany and elsewhere in Europe worsened last week, with Gazprom reducing supplies via Nord Stream 1 by 60%. Economy and Climate Minister Robert Habeck was forced to enact the second stage of the gas emergency plan, which means that gas is a scarce resource now. Incidentally, the G7 looked into further economic sanctions and actually discussed measures like a price cap on Russian oil and gas, but did not come to any conclusions. In Washington last night, US Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, said that in the US assessment, Putin's goals remain unchanged. That is to say, he wants to take most of Ukraine. She also said that in the likeliest scenario, the war will grind on for, quote, an extended period of time. And now let's turn to András for the military assessment, please.
Let's discuss what's going on in the easternmost top of the Donbas salient. As Henning already explained, the city of Severodonetsk has fallen. Russian troops managed to line up on the river Siversky Donetsk. And bad news, let me shift to a higher focus map. The city of Lysychansk, here you see, is in the process of getting encircled. And because Russians are moving forward with this encirclement, see where I'm pointing with the mouse, it's highly likely that Lysychansk is going to fall in the next upcoming few days. Because of this encirclement and Lysychansk and the defenders of Lysychansk gradually getting cut off from the rest of the Donbas salient, there is no way Ukraine could hold this position too many more days. Once Lysychansk falls, this will be the end of the Ukrainian control over Luhansk Oblast, Luhansk region, at least for the moment. So Russia will certainly kind of celebrate the quotation mark liberation of Luhansk Oblast, and still Russians are unlikely to stop. Instead, they keep moving forward until they capture the entirety of the Donetsk region as well. However, even though Russia is going to try to picture the capture of Lysychansk as some kind of a strategic victory, in fact, it's not. So the defense of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk has had the purpose from the Ukrainian side to poke down the Russian forces, make the Russians concentrate all their forces in this region, and thereby allow Ukraine to strengthen its position in other regions and generally to win time for the training of new units and also for the arrival of Western weapons. Speaking of Western weapons, another important development of the past 2 weeks, that new shipments of long-range Western artilleries have arrived to Ukraine, including particularly the German Panzerhaubitze 2000 and also the American-made HIMARS missile launchers. HIMARS have already seen action. They proved to be very, very efficient against Russian troops and positions, particularly in the Izium region. If we shift the focus a bit and take a look at the entirety of the Donbas salient, we see that Ukrainian counterattack, there is a counterattack going on here in the Izium region and also here south of Izium. The purpose of these Ukrainian moves is basically to endanger the Russian ground lines of communication so to hamper Russia's efforts to cut off the rest of the Donbas salient. When it comes to the other sections of the front line, Ukrainian counterattack has been going on still in the Kherson region in the south. Please allow me to show it. So this is Kherson region. The blue spots or the blue places mark the territories that Ukrainians managed to get back. Russians here are clearly in a defensive position. Russians don't have enough force to go again on offensive in the Kherson region. They are trying to defend their positions. Bad news, they are extensively mining Kherson region, both the region around Kherson and the northwest territories of the Kherson region. They are using all the types of mines they can get hold of. This is going to cause a lasting problem for Ukraine. You remember probably all that last week Ukrainian officials said publicly that the size of the mined territories or the territories that require demining is at least 260,000 square kilometers. In 260,000 square kilometers, originally I'm from Hungary, the size of my country is 93,000 square kilometers. So the territories mined are actually basically Hungary 3 times or 1/3 of Ukraine's territory, because Ukraine is around 600,000 square kilometers. So we speak here about an extremely serious situation when it comes to demining. The last point from my side, we need to focus also on the Kharkiv region. As you know it very well, the Kharkiv region since April, Ukrainian forces were quite successful in counterattacking and pushing the Russians away from Kharkiv. Here comes the bad news. Russians are trying to retain or regain their positions around Kharkiv. First, this again endangers Kharkiv because the city will be again in the range of Russian tube and missile artillery. And further bad news, this Russian gain here, this kind of green circle, may indicate, as Henning already said, that the fact that Russians are dedicating some of their yet scarce human resources to an offensive or a counter push in Kharkiv, it probably indicates that they haven't yet given up the ambition to gain to capture Kharkiv, or at least to inflict serious damage to the city. So while in the beginning of June and late May, it looked like that Russians were really concentrating on the Donbas region, and the Donbas region is their main priority, and they may run out of forces and not be able to do anything else anywhere else. Now this calculation probably needs to be altered if Russians continue their push around Kharkiv. So the variables to watch, and that's my last point here. So before the summer break, the variable to watch regarding Russia's military activity is whether Russia goes for a mobilization, either a partial mobilization or a full mobilization. Because if they do, this would enable them to raise tens of thousands of new troops in a few months' time, which could become decisive in Russia's war against Ukraine. If they do not mobilize, then they will gradually run out of deployable manpower. So hopefully, after they finish capturing Luhansk and Donetsk region, they will have to slow down due to the shortage of manpower. At least this is how the calculus looks like right now. Before and after the summer break, we should know a lot more. Thank you again for joining us. That's it from my side. Sharing over. Thanks.
There was another meeting between Putin and Lukashenko. There were some reports that some of the missiles came from Belarusian territory. Has there been any change in the sort of in the position or in the role Belarus is playing in this war?
Not that much. I mean, if you remember the beginning of the war, the battle for Kiev, there were hundreds of missiles launched from the Belarusian side. So Belarus has been an active participant in this war ever since day one. I mean, except of sending regular fighting troops to Ukrainian territory, Belarus has done everything else to support Russia's invasions. The only novelty in this weekend's attack, at this time, Russia launched missiles from Belarus by using heavy bombers operating from Belarusian airspace and launching their missiles from Belarusian airspace against Ukraine. Otherwise, not much new. During the Saturday meeting, Putin promised Iskander missiles to Lukashenko by pointing out that Iskanders are nuclear-capable weapons. If one reads the transcript of the conversation, Putin mentioned the word nuclear-capable at least 3 or 4 times. So probably it's part of a Russian information operation to emphasize that Belarus is going to get missiles which could theoretically carry also nuclear warheads. Good news, there is no chance that Russia would give nuclear weapons to Belarus or even to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus, due to a number of reasons. First and foremost, Belarus has no knowledge, no expertise, no infrastructure at all for handling or managing or maintaining nuclear weapons. Second, Russia never gives nuclear weapons out of their hands, particularly not to other countries or to such unreliable allies like Belarus. So not much to change from the Belarusian side. It's still very unlikely that the Belarusian army would get actively engaged in the fighting, simply because the Belarusian army is under-trained and under-equipped for such a task. Thank you.
Thank you very much, András. Let's turn now to Rebecca Harms, please, for a few words on the situation in Ukraine.
Yeah, good morning again, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to actively participate in these morning briefings. I joined before as a participant and find it quite useful. What can I add? My topic should be the candidate status and what it means for Ukraine. I was in Ukraine 2 weeks ago for 1 week. I visited Lviv and I had meetings there with friends and civil society partners from all over Ukraine. They had been relocated to Lviv, and together with colleagues working for Kiev Dialogue, I tried to find out more about the situation of the condition and the conditions for civil society groups, active civil society groups involved in different processes now, supporting the army, supporting internally displaced people. And I also tried to investigate the situation of journalists working in Ukraine under conditions of war. I mentioned this not to go deeper into these issues, but both issues, situation of civil society and also situation of journalists, deserve more attention as topics for the period to come in Ukraine. So the candidate status, on the one hand, is a major step for Ukraine. I was together with friends close to the Rynok in Lviv. We were waiting the press conference announced for Zelensky, Scholz, Macron, Draghi, and President Johannes. And we did not know what to expect until the very last moment. And for me, I have to admit, after research I had done with members of the German government before, I was surprised in the end that they really decided in favor of the candidate status. I expected a weaker decision, especially by the Western leaders of the European Union. With the friends in Ukraine, we brought at that interesting and important moment, we brought a toast, not to Scholz, Macron and Draghi, but to President Zelensky and Ursula von der Leyen. Because we, as people who had been working for Ukraine's membership perspective and entry to the European Union for nearly 2 decades, we really found that their political courage, Zelensky's and von der Leyen's political courage, was to be applauded firstly. This candidate status, and I have to admit, in this actual Ukrainian context, I'm not really a friend of these technical wordings of the European Union, but this candidate status really means a lot of moral support, very much needed moral support for Ukrainians. It was in Lviv really a moment of great joy, and during the next days, everybody talked about nothing else than what it means. So the European Council some days later followed the proposal which has been made public by the European Commission for this candidate status, and members of the council in Brussels declared this a historic decision. I think history will show what is really the consequence out of this. My feeling is that history is so far and also for the period to come very much decided not in Brussels, but on the battlefields in the Donbass and in Ukraine. And right now, I think for the European Union, it's very important to understand that granting of candidate status is not the way to weaken support on other levels and in other contexts. Granting candidate status, from my point of view, now means that the support of Ukraine in every sense, on all levels, has to become better and stronger and even more reliable. Otherwise, this whole exercise of the candidate status and deciding about reform process to be opened later makes no sense. And especially after, again, listening to András and following the military development in Donbass. So I would say that still the delivery of weapons, of all kinds of weapons, is what has to happen. So if Ukraine can't stand and can't win in this horrid war of aggression by Russia, then so the European future is far away for the future in the European Union is as far away for Ukraine as it has been before. In addition to the necessary supply with weapons, and especially after my talks in Lviv with people from all over Ukraine, I would say that humanitarian support of all kinds has to be increased, and we have to check whether what we have been doing so far is really efficient. A question whether the international organizations do what they can, what they are able to do, and whether they are cooperating with people on the ground in an efficient way is for me an open question and needs to be investigated before autumn. I think Ukraine has to be prepared for the winter in a much better way than it has happened so far. Even in Lviv, I found the situation of internally displaced people, so refugees coming from eastern or southern parts of Ukraine. The situation of those refugees is far away from being okay or close to okay. The situation is deplorable for many and has to be changed as soon as possible. According to what I heard from colleagues who work with civil society groups in Eastern Ukraine, in Zaporizhia and other places, we really have to strengthen humanitarian aid before we discuss deeply about recovery and rebuilding. Right now, for many people, it is about how to survive the next period. What I also wanted to mention is that so the whole debate about sanctions should not be forgotten. To sanction Russia and to get out of the energy dependence in Europe from Russia is key still, because from my point of view, this whole issue of sanctions in the field of energy and of developing alternative supply routes is a question not only about economic issues, but it's really one of the fields where we have to try to disarm Russia and to escape this weaponization of energy. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rebecca Harms. And with a sort of an eye on the clock, let's turn now to Guntram Wolff.
So good morning, and thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And I was asked to talk more about the question of sanctions and energy. And so Rebecca Harms already gave the perfect transition to my presentation. And what I thought is I would also share some slides to give you a flavor of where we stand. So what is the issue? So the issue is quite simple. So the European Union, the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and allies have actually established a number of major and implemented a number of major sanctions against Russia. Those sanctions have been effective. So the central bank reserve freezing in particular has had a major impact on the Russian economy. The ruble, upon announcement of that sanction, massively lost in value. It lost basically 50% of its value in the course of a few days. The problem, however, has been that since then it has more than recovered. It actually is now stronger than it used to be before the entry, before the war started. So the real question is, why is this the case? Why has the Russian economy so far been able to sustain the effect of sanctions on its economy? And I think what I'm describing is really the current dynamics. The medium-term questions of how the sanctions work, especially the sanctions in the technology field, is a little bit outside of my analysis here. I would argue that the departure of major international companies as well as the technology sanctions will, of course, put Russia on a lower growth path in the coming years. However, in the current situation, what counts the most is, of course, the funding of the Russian Federation. And for that, oil and gas revenues are really, really important. And those oil and gas revenues have, in fact, been always at the core of Russia's geoeconomic and geopolitical power. That was already the case in the Cold War. It was very well understood by the communists. And of course, it was also well understood by the KGB officers that I guess are now called differently, but that are essentially controlling important parts of the Russian economy and have systematically, after the takeover, after the start of the presidency of Vladimir Putin, really taken control of, I would say, key parts of the Russian energy system. And so why has the ruble recovered? Well, basically because the economics of the energy sanctions has been a failure. It has been ill-designed so far, and I do want to talk about what's going to come next. But first, I want to explain to you why so far it's been a failure. Okay, so what is the core of the issue? The core of the issue is that the Western partners, and in particular the European Union, which is one of the main importers of oil and gas from Russia, has announced an oil embargo without yet implementing it. And if you do some basic economics on this, it's quite clear that an announcement of a future embargo on the second biggest oil exporter in the world and the first biggest gas exporter in the world will drive up prices because in the future quantities will be scarce, so prices react immediately. However, quantities haven't fallen. On the contrary, according to our tracker at Bruegel, where we really look at in detail at the exports of oil that Russia actually undertakes at the moment, the quantities have actually even increased compared to the year before. So what do we have? We have the same quantities or higher quantities, and we have much higher prices. Well, what that means, it means extraordinary profits, of course. And given that production costs of oil and gas are really quite low in Russia, these profits are really, really significant. We are estimating that the daily sales of fossil fuels of Russia bring about $1 billion US per day into the war chests, as revenues to Russia. We know that the Russian federal budget, even back in February, was to 40% funded by oil and gas revenues. That number has gone up in the meantime. So this is a major funding stream for the Russian Federation, and therefore also, of course, for Russia's military endeavors. So when you have these high revenues on oil, guess what you can do? Well, you can use your geopolitical leverage and your geopolitical instrument, which is gas. And that's what Vladimir Putin has been doing. So he is turning the screws. He is reducing gas flows to Europe. And this chart shows the daily gas flows to Europe. And you see it's been really, really coming down. And the question is, well, why is it happening now? Well, I think the first point is oil revenues are so high that he can really afford doing it. I mean, he doesn't need to sell gas anymore. But of course, an important further consideration is storages. At the speed of storage filling that Europe could refill its storages in the last months, we would have been able to really fill our storages in the next 2 months ahead of the winter. That would have given Vladimir Putin considerably less leverage over our political system and our economies. So he had to do something about it. And so he stopped basically delivering gas exactly at the moment where it became clear, well, we are actually able to recover and refill our storages ahead of the winter. Now we are in the situation that our storages are filled to something like 55 to 60%. And that means that depending on, of course, how the demand evolves, but in most scenarios, it is quite likely that storages will be depleted in the course of this winter, meaning there will have to be rationing of gas during this winter. So let's look at that in some more detail and develop that argument in some more detail in a minute. But let me just say that, of course, this isn't to say that the European and the German government hasn't responded to this crisis in the energy markets. On the contrary, there has been a significant reaction by Robert Habeck's ministry and the German government's ministry, the German government's approach to oil and gas. And what you can see on this chart is that the European Union has been able to significantly diversify away from Russian gas during 2022. In 2021, 41% of our gas came from Russia. Well, that number is down to 15%. And it has been essentially replaced by LNG, so liquid gas, which comes by ships. And that LNG gas essentially comes from the United States. So there has been a pretty significant change already in the gas import mix of the European Union and, of course, also of Germany. And so this is, I think, good news, but it is, in fact, only a partial response, as I will argue, because it is a response on the supply side only. So basically, we've been trying to diversify supplies away from Russia and get other sources of supply. What we haven't done, and that I would say is a mistake of the German government, and it's basically a mistake giving into various domestic pressures, is we haven't been able to really operate on the demand and try to reduce our demand for oil and gas in the last couple of months. Only now, I think last week or early this week, Robert Habeck has announced the next stage of the energy emergency scenario. But even now, I mean, instead of really giving a signal that we have to bring down our oil and gas consumption, we are still having things like the Tankrabatt, so the gas rebate, or we are basically not limiting speed on highways, etc., etc. So there have been really important and clear proposals on how demand can be brought down, for example, by the International Energy Agency and many others. But those haven't been implemented. And of course, that increases our vulnerability at this stage. Now, let me talk, and this is sort of just an updated slide that I prepared actually this morning. It's about the G7 decision in Elmau. So there was some further development on this whole energy saga. And that was basically a decision by the G7 to implement a price cap, on imports of fossil fuels from Russia. Now, the details still need to be worked out. So this the document just has a few bullet points on this, so it needs to be really specified more clearly. But the basic idea is to implement a price cap and use it to apply and basically implement a price cap, but go beyond just the European market. And so how do you do this? Well, you basically want to sanction extraterritorially. So meaning not only do we stop buying above a specific price, we also want others to not be able to buy above a specific price. And the way we do this, and the way the G7 intends to do this, is by controlling the freight insurance market. So that sounds very technical, and it is, but when it's to explain it in very simple terms, when you put oil on a ship, that oil and that ship has to be insured. And that insurance market is essentially a market that is controlled in London and in the European Union. And so by controlling that insurance market and limiting insurance for all those ships that carry oil and gas at a price higher than the price cap that the G7 decides, is a way of trying to sort of enlarge the effectiveness of the price cap. Because obviously, if the price cap cannot be enforced and only Europe enforces that price cap, and the rest of the world can deviate from that, it will lead to more or less quickly to a redirection of Russian oil and gas. And I can talk about the speed at which this is possible for Russia to redirect its supplies to other places in the world. But obviously, the more comprehensive this price cap is, and the more it affects all countries, the more it's implemented by all countries around the world, the more effective it is. There is one more proposal that I do want to mention here, which I thought is very useful. And I did have a discussion with Markus Brunnermeier the other day in Sintra at the ECB conference. Markus Brunnermeier is a German economist in Princeton. And he is basically saying, well, what we need is instead of a price cap, we need some sort of a buyers cartel, meaning buyers have to come together and propose and basically propose a medium high price, but give certainty on that medium high price so as to incentivize new suppliers to enter the market and thereby reduce the energy rents of Russia as quickly as possible. So this is, this is quite a technical proposal, but I think it's something, if there's some technical people in the room, they might want to look up this paper. I think it's a very useful paper that could be quite complementary to what has been decided. So let me summarize and finish my presentation. So I would say the political system has reacted and has diversified gas and oil supplies. This is really a big achievement of the German government and especially of the climate ministry, economics and climate ministry. But the major shortcomings have been on the demand side. Demand reduction measures have been weak initially and come very late. Simple measures such as speed limits have been ignored despite advice to the contrary by the International Energy Agency and many others. I think also this whole debate on nuclear energy is full of taboos in Germany. I mean, it's outside of Germany, and I'm outside of Germany at the moment. Outside of Germany, nobody understands the position of Germany on this topic. And so it seems to me, given that we have actually 3 nuclear power plants still operating, and even though they would apparently only deliver 4 or 5% of the electricity demand that we have currently, well, these 4 or 5% of electricity will really matter if our storages of gas are at 0 in February. And so in that sense, I think we need to do, in my view, we need to do everything we can to sort of get the additional supply to keep those 3 power plants going at least another 6 months. And yes, there is an issue of how big is the security risk, but we have to weigh the security risk of essentially rationing major parts of our economy with the security risk of running 3 nuclear power plants that are anyway currently running and that therefore I assume are relatively safe by another 3 or 6 months. So I really cannot understand how we can stop them at the end of December, but perhaps I'm also missing something there. So I think this perhaps to also get us discuss something. So more forceful demand action earlier would have given much more political space. So we have also, last point, we've argued for a tariff solution, which I think would have been much more effective in really reducing Putin's leverage on us. But the reality is now, we are in a very difficult spot at the moment, and unless we give in to blackmail, the economic fallout can be much bigger. And so basically, on balance, if we compare the situation with the one from February, so the upside is that there has been diversification of supply. We have managed to fill the storages. We do have some other sources, but on the downside is we have actually wasted a couple of very valuable months for basically substituting out of oil and gas into other forms of energy. On average, we are probably as vulnerable as we were back in February to Russian blackmail in our gas and oil markets. Let me stop here.
Thank you very much for this extended of where we are standing, and of course the conclusion that we are no better off than we were in February is not very reassuring. With an eye on the clock, we have only about 15 minutes left now. Rebecca Harms has already reacted to some of your remarks in the chat. I would like to invite her to respond directly. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please raise your hands now, and I try to involve as many as I can in this discussion. But first, to Rebecca Harms, please.
Yeah, So I would like, first of all, to come back to the issues around the candidate status and the decision-making process. I think besides that, this was a major success in this cooperation, special cooperation between Mr. Zelensky and Mrs. von der Leyen. It was also a success of the Eastern European member states in the European Union, because they forced, I think, Mr. Macron and Mr. Scholz to jump and to give up their skeptical and even anti-candidate status positions. So what this will mean in the future, I think needs a lot of attention, but I'm of the opinion that Ukraine is prepared to undergo these reform processes which will be required if the country is able to go back to normal. So war and reforms are quite a tough topic, I would say. Whether this can exist, whether reforms can take place while this war goes on is easily to be answered. It can't. But on the other hand, if Ukraine goes back to normal, the country can build on huge experience which we made together, also the European side, the European partners, in the reform processes based on the association agreement. So it's already a long process behind us, which prepared Ukraine and the European Union for the future processes based on the candidate status. On the energy issues, so I have to admit, from the very beginning of the debate in Germany, quite disappointed, not only with the government in general, but also with my own Green people in the government. I had expected them to be much better prepared for the application of a sanction regime. And as Guntram has mentioned, the biggest disappointment for me was the weakness of decision-making processes on reducing consumption. So it's bizarre that you follow the declaration of a Zeitenwende, and then one field of weakening the weapons in the hands of Putin, so bring down consumption, is not at all used for several months. So it's quite astonishing until today for me why this happened, so that it's difficult to explain to the citizens is a weak explanation, because citizens in Germany, and this is the same for other European countries, were from the very beginning very open to all kinds of measures in the discussion, and also very supportive for Ukraine as such. The nuclear issue, which has been mentioned, it might be a surprise for you because I'm known as a kind of a leading figure in the anti-nuclear fights of Germany for many decades. I declared already openly 3 months ago that for me, so under conditions which we have to define, the prolongation of production of 3 nuclear plants in Germany is not at all a problem. That's not decisive for the future energy mix of Germany, but it's decisive for the very moment of urgency and a supply side to be guaranteed. I'm sometimes much more worried about the nuclear plants in Ukraine. So the country, meanwhile, depends heavily on nuclear production. The plants are running since a long time, beyond probably the technical technical status. So I knew personally, I visited Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. I also know personally Rivne. I really recommend to those who have now doubts about the prolongation of 3 German nuclear plants for 6 months, if the supply side is functioning, yeah, those who have doubts about security, they really should have a look on what's going on in Ukraine, and they have to rethink their arguments in Germany, because the situation in Ukraine is much more worrying, especially since Russia is even dared to attack nuclear infrastructure of Ukraine.
Many thanks. The debate about the sort of reducing consumption has already sort of turned into sort of the tabloid TV question whether you are still allowed to have a shower or not, and sort of having a shower longer than a minute is a sort of act of enacting freedom or whatever. So this I think
it was a bit like the former campaigns of our now coalition partner, the Liberal Party, FDP, against energy transition and against new ideas about how to deal with scarce resources. So it was a bit strange how much these stupid campaigns from old times affected the capability of the government to act.
Thank you. Guntram Wolff wanted to come in, and maybe I should pick up 1 or 2 of the questions from the chat. So just though you have something else to know, there's a sort of general point being made: is it really necessary to raise nuclear? Rebecca Harms, I think, has already mentioned, also gave an answer to that, as someone who has fought against nuclear power for decades. But maybe there's also a question to you two panelists: sort of, what is your sense of reaching a negotiated solution, which there has been another open letter being published by Die Zeit of a group of people who somehow think that a negotiated solution is only around the corner. Guntram first, please.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to react to the 2 comments here on the chat as regards nuclear. I mean, one question is about the fuel and can we get the fuel and secure the fuel? And it's true that a lot of the fuel comes from Russia and other places. So yes, this is an effort. One has to find other sources, but there are other sources, and with political will, you cannot tell me that it's impossible to secure fuel in 6 months down the road. So it seems to me that supply issue is solvable. The other more substantive question by where is it here, by Robert Speerfeld, on sort of the flexibility that gas provides and that nuclear cannot provide. I mean, that is correct. So gas, I mean, the beauty of gas and why is gas important is basically because renewables has a volatility, right? And so depending on when the sun is shining or less shining, you have to power up or power down nuclear. But the situation we will face in this winter is a completely different one. It's not about the volatility of renewables. It's about the fact that overall there will be insufficient supply of energy. So it really becomes a base energy. So put differently, nuclear is not a long-term solution to the future of the energy system. The future of the energy system doesn't need nuclear. I mean, the future of and nuclear is expensive and does not provide what is needed. What is needed in the future of the energy system is flexible energy supply that can be quickly powered up and down depending on availability of renewables. But this is not going to be the situation that will constrain us this winter. So in that sense, I don't think I'm pleading at all for a prolongation of nuclear for the next decades or something like this. It's really about managing, I would say, the constraints this winter.
Thank you, Rebecca. You want to pick up on that?
I totally agree. I think the German government would be easily able to condition a limited prolongation of lifetime or production time of the 3 nuclear power plants. Really the issue is about urgency and not about long time perspectives for nuclear. I worked extensively for many years, especially on the economic side. And I'm really convinced that the economic facts, so about the nuclear sector, are speaking totally against the future of nuclear power, not only in Germany, but beyond. I'm right now in France. I'm following the news about reactors disconnected from the grid every day. So France, with these reactors, which friends of mine call pensioner reactors, is in a very difficult situation. And they also have not yet a clear perspective how to come out of their monostructured energy sector. But nuclear for sure has no great future, and German Greens should not create the wrong fears and the wrong debates about these urgency situation where we need the 3 reactors for the next winter in Germany.
Very much. The question is, of course, sort of the owners or the companies running the nuclear plants still in operation in Germany, that they seem to be really reluctant to change track, but that might change once the situation becomes more pressing. As I said in the chat, there was one question by James, really sort of basically asking, sort of, is there an alternative to what we are seeing, that the war continues and that we are going into a deep crisis around winter time? There are sort of, in the German public at least, there are these hopes. Do you share them in any way, Rebecca Harms?
Well, I mean,
so the crisis I fear is for Ukraine, honestly. How Ukraine is going through the winter, if the war goes on, that's the real issue. That Germans are able to reduce their energy consumption. So for me, it's clearly a possibility, and it's not creating an awful situation. I think Robert Habeck mentioned during the last days, to explain better what are the challenges, and also he started to escape from this wrong confrontation in which on the one side, the citizens are, and on the other side, the industry and the economy. So to find a solution which suits all, which requires contributions from everybody. That's the right way. But we should not worry, first of all, about ourselves. We will make it through the winter. So regarding the supply side in all fields of energy, but Ukraine is in a very, very difficult situation already now.
Thank you very much for pointing this out. Guntram Wolff.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, I think my worry is really that this war drags on. The military situation, we heard, looks quite precarious, and weapon delivery is not fast enough, and so Ukraine comes into the fall and into the winter, and then basically. What will happen is that we are quite under pressure on the energy side from Russia. There will be a lot of political pressure from many European countries to push for some sort of negotiated deal, and the problem being that it will be a negotiated deal at a moment of weakness, right? And so, and that's not a good deal. That's going to be a bad deal. And so this is why I think these discussions are very much interlinked, and that's why I think we really need we need to work as quickly as possible on the demand side now, to be less politically dependent on the situation. And frankly speaking, we need to accelerate weapon delivery so that the deal doesn't look so attractive to Putin. Now, when exactly both sides will be ready to negotiate a deal, when will Ukraine be ready, and when will Russia be ready? I mean, that's very difficult to predict, right? And these things are very, very difficult to predict. I think our position at this stage needs to be give all the support, financial support, by the way, which I haven't talked about much, but we already had an opinion piece in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung and others already a few months ago. We need, of course, to give major financial support to Ukraine so that they can sustain their war efforts. We need to give military support, and we need to operate on the sanctions and become better on the sanctions and become less vulnerable, so that Ukraine is really in the best possible position to negotiate when it wants to negotiate, and when it thinks it's now the right moment to negotiate. I think we really need to have the aim that Ukraine wins this war. I mean, it's as simple as that, and we are not supporting enough at the moment. The G7 was perhaps a turning point. I mean, there were some major new commitments at the G7. So in that sense, I'm perhaps a little bit hopeful, including financial commitments that are quite significant that were decided, but also more military commitments. But really, it's quite important that Ukraine doesn't lose this war, but wins it, because if it loses it, it will only incentivize Putin to go for new adventures.
Thank you very much. We are unfortunately out of time, but I would like to give Milanic the possibility for 2 or 3 quick concluding remarks. Milan, are you in the call?
Good morning. Yes, good morning, everybody. I don't want to take a lot of your time. 3.1. We started this series on the 24th of February this week by coincidence. We prepared something for the day when the war started earlier that week after Putin's speech, which we sensed that with Stefan Meister that the war, something is coming. And I just want to acknowledge that this was a very persistent effort, a weekly series that now present in our video archive on our webpage a certain chronicle of how the military situation evolved. We also, in every edition, we try to go deeper into one aspect of the war. So I just want to encourage you to use the summer break to go on our webpage to the dossier on the war and to even rewatch some of the editions back. Secondly, it was a team effort. So allow me to take this moment to sincerely and wholeheartedly thank Henning Hoff for excellent moderation. Almost on a weekly basis. I think there was only a moment during Easter holidays when you took off. Then Julia Aloeva from our event department, Vincent Venus from our communication department, who edits every YouTube recording so that you can, when you go back to watch it, that you have it sort of explained in chapters, so it's easy to watch. And then from our speakers to András Racz, and this series were partly around him and his military expertise that he provided almost every week. And then Stefan Meister, who jumped in every second or third week with the focus on Russia. And thirdly, I want to thank to all of you who were with us as our audience for this series. We will use the summer break to evaluate how to do it better when we are back. I think the war will be still there. So I wish you a very good holidays and summer break, and stay tuned to our social media where we will announce when we are back, already with Guntram Wolff in taking the captainship of the whole DGAP. So Guntram, we are looking forward to your full arrival in August. All the best from me.
Thank you very much, Nilan. And of course, thank you for being this sort of guiding light behind this whole effort. I remember many times where sort of late at night we were still looking for speakers and trying to get the best combination together. So thank you very much, Milan, for pushing us and keeping the show on the road. Maybe we could say, as you say, the war goes on. We take a short break, but DGAP, of course, doesn't take a break. Follow the website and also the DGAP social media outlets for a continuous comments and analysis of the war in Ukraine, but also on sort of basically all questions referring to international affairs as they're presented to us these days. Please join me in thanking our two speakers and also András Racz for joining us earlier, and hope to see you at some point after the summer. And I'm wishing you a very good morning. Thank you.